Well, greetings, good people. Welcome to our webinar today, where we talk about building bridges, the role of trust between civic organizations and communities. Listen, today I get to welcome this amazing individual from ResearchScape. Now, before we get deep into today's insights, let me introduce you to the data mastermind himself, Tony Cheevers of ResearchScape. This man lives and breathes market research, turning raw numbers into stories that drive smart decisions. Now, whether you're trying to predict the next big trend or make sense of shifting consumer mindsets, Tony's the guy you want breaking it down for you. So I want you to sit tight, get ready for some real talk backed up by real data because Tony, he's going to take you to a place you probably didn't even assume you wanted to go today, but watch out. And then we have someone that when the stakes are high and the message has to be right, there's one man you want in your corner, and that's Paul of Omodt and Associates Critical Communications. Paul's been in the trenches helping brands and leaders navigate through tough conversations. And we have a lot of those these days. Media storms and crisis moments with confidence, okay, and clarity. He doesn't just manage reputation, he builds trust. And let's see, if you've ever wondered how to turn chaos into clarity, because there's a lot of chaos going on these days, Paul's about to drop a level of knowledge on you that you can take back and master communications in whatever organization you work in. And I mean, whatever industry it is, communications and data will be what helps you navigate yourself out of that. So welcome, Tony and Paul.
Oh, happy to be here, Tonya. Thank you.
I'm thrilled that we get to have this conversation today because it feels like the world is, when we've been having a lot of earthquakes out here in California recently, and I feel like we're living in aftershocks. Like we've been in an aftershock since the beginning of 2025. And I think what you guys bring to the table helps people really recognize and understand that there are solutions. You just have to have the right tools, right? And Tony has the science behind it, the numbers, the research, and you have the practicality to put people at ease knowing that there are solutions out there. And I think a lot of times when there's chaos, people don't feel like there's solutions. They're just crazy. But we have solutions to help them today. So thank you so much for being here. Any thoughts before we get into some of the research that Tony's done?
I'm ready to talk about the data, but
So, Tony, let me kind of give an intro before Tony goes into the data, because here's I mean, we're living in a very interesting time, right? So you mentioned earthquakes. And so there's all types of earthquakes. There's a physical earthquake, but there's also like the political earthquakes that we're going through and the aftershocks of that. And so I know Tony's going to go through the data, but listen to the data and look where the trust gets built, because that's where you find that stability between the aftershocks, right? So we can build stability for local governments, for example, based on how they choose to communicate and to whom. And so it's a very strategic choices we get to make. But I'd just tell our viewers, hey, Tony's got some great insights here that we can capitalize on to make those aftershocks go much, much smoother.
Oh, I love that. I didn't think about it like that. Thanks for that. All right, Tony, I'm going to go ahead and, you know, get right into this. And I think I have the control, so you got to let me know when to change the slides. I'm sorry.
yeah, I think I wanted to jump ahead to slide 4. But what I wanted to just give you both a quick shout out, because we started talking about this back at the end of 2024 around trust in local government, city government in smaller municipalities and cities. And I just think that's so interesting, because so much of the trust data we see is big global studies, and so much of, as Paul refers to, the aftershocks, and you both talk about aftershocks, it affects you in your local community. So what's going on across the world of 10,000 people is not so relevant as what's going on in your neighborhood and with your community. So with that said, the three of us worked together on this study that was done in early December. We call this a nationally representative study. So it's people who are living in communities primarily under 75,000 households, and trying to get a sense of who do they trust, who do they look to for information, how do they access that information. So if we could jump ahead to slide number 7. And the first thing that really jumped out at me is, do you trust the information your local city provides? 87% of people said yes. And getting more than 50% of people to say yes to anything or agreed on anything is a huge number. So this is a stellar, that people are trusting the information their local city provides. And then the flip side is, how much do you trust the people who work for and lead your local city government? And that number drops down to 37%. So I think there's something idea for future research there as to the institutions seem to garner a tremendous degree of trust, yet the individuals not so much. So where's the gap there? What can we do to figure out what the difference is there? If we could jump ahead to slide number 10. What I thought was interesting here, and this supports other work we've done, is fire far outweighs police in terms of trust. In trust extremely well, fire is double. And some of the research we've done suggests that people can envision, a stove fire, a gas heater, something. They can picture that in their life, and or being in an accident and there's a fire as a result of a car accident. But they don't typically think about being involved with the police or crime, except that police and police issues are in the news much more. So I think it's interesting that fire, they fundraise more, they are trusted more, and they stay out of the media for negative reasons, but they also have that positive association of, if this occurs in my life, which it may, they're going to be there to respond. We could jump ahead to slide 18. What I wanted to point out here, and Tonya and Paul, you're the experts, is when you're asking people, where do you find trusted sources of information regarding the city you live in, it's going to vary all over. Those little arrows you see are statistically significant arrows. So local news is prominent among male and female, hugely prominent among boomers. And then when you get to millennials, Gen Z, drops significantly, and people are looking at social media and other sources for their source of news. So I'll let you two comment on that separately, but let's jump ahead to slide 25. I'm just going to talk about this real quick. How do you prefer to get government from information from your city government? Website is overwhelming. If anybody on the session today wants more information, it breaks out by age, gender, ethnicity. Website is the big number. However, that it does vary based on who you are and how you identify. And we're going to jump way ahead to slide 57, and I'm almost done with my overview of the data. I'm talking about, how do you prefer to get information from your city government? And again, the key here is website is the big number that you saw on the prior slide. Baby boomers, way up there. Millennials drop significantly. Social media takes over. So it's having a good website is important, but it's only really reaching one major age group in your overall population. And we're going to jump to slide 61. How frequently do you seek out your city's information? It's interesting that, again, this varies. Younger people and people who are Black and non-Hispanic, Hispanic, and Asian are much more active in looking for information about the city. If we could jump to, bear with me 1 second, I'm going to skip over a few to slide 59, and then I'll be wrapping up. Sorry, yeah. The slide is how often do you add social media commentary about your local city government? And again, younger people and people who identify, who self-select as Black, non-Hispanic, Hispanic, and Asian are much more likely to be on the city's website, adding social media commentary. So again, you two are the experts. You can talk more about why that is and what the strategy is to respond to that. But I'm going to turn it back over to you because that's just some highlights of the data that I thought were very interesting.
I want to go back to 57 really quick, and I have a question for both of you that, especially in this moment, it just leaves me wondering who are the people that really don't seek government and organizational information. Like, is there any information, is there any research you've done that actually talks about that? Because I feel like we're in a place where there are people that are fine not seeking information and only getting information from uh, whoever tells them stuff. You know what I'm saying? The uncurious, those that like to be just told what to do and don't seek out information for themselves. Is there any information on that?
I'll quickly say I think that's a great topic for future research. The silent generation, people born 1945 and earlier, on some of these slides, and again, there's a ton of slides, they're ranking 0 on participation, seeking information. They're not providing any social media commentary. But I love it. The designation is uncurious. So if they're not participating, are they not looking for information, or are they looking for it in places that we're not measuring? So I think that's a great topic for future research.
And Tonya, if I could jump in on that too. So if you look at that same kind of concept from like an innovation scale. So if you look at like technology adoption, I always use the story of the new Apple phone that comes out every year, right? At the one edge, you see the people, hey, we're putting out Apple phone 20, whatever the latest version is. There'll be 2% of the Apple population, right, wherever they may be, who are willing to go sleep outside of an Apple store to be the first one in line to get it, right? We know that pattern goes. And at the end of that, adoption curve, right, there's always the laggards that never come along. Here's the kind of interesting thing. When you look at Tony's data here, and you see that 87% trust government and there's 13% that don't, that's like the same number of people you see in adoption scale that are laggards, just in a different topic, kind of a different data set. But if you think about it that way, there are certain groups of any population that are just never going to plug in. It doesn't mean you can ignore them. It doesn't mean that you don't have to have strategy to reach them. It just means that they're really not going to engage in the ways that we think they are, and so we have to engage them differently. They may never change. So I typically tell my clients is, hey, don't ignore the laggards, don't put down the laggards, but find out a different way to either keep them kind of in neutral so they don't become angry, so they have enough information and channels that work for them so they get it. But it's always interesting to me that those percentages sometimes overlap really well to other adoption scales or other ways we see populations taking in information.
Let me ask you this. We talked about people, Tony, you talked about people that do not trust the people running these government organizations. They trust the organization, they don't trust the people. Do you think that it's because these organizations do not do a good job helping people get to know the leaders in these organizations? Either one of you can take that.
I would love to take that question, Tonya, because I've worked really hard with some local cities here in the Twin Cities area on that very question, because we see that data, and kind of that data from a government standpoint and a government service standpoint isn't acceptable to a lot of my clients that I work with. And so let me give you two examples on this. I'll give you the fun one first. So we see that data, and you're a city of 60,000 people here in the metro area, Twin Cities metro area, and we know that the leaders aren't trusted. Well, you have to define, is that the elected leaders, is it the civic leaders, is it the city leaders, right? And so we start finding ways to bring out those leaders in a way that gives them kind of a personality and an approach and an approachability. And so typically what we'll do is we'll actually write them a personal brand narrative for them, so that something that they're comfortable with. So people feel like, hey, I'm not calling the city manager, I'm calling Bob, or I'm calling Sally, or whatever the person's name is. We give them kind of a personal moniker, and then we see them out in the community. The example I use is that one of the cities I work with, they do a video series, and they do it on TikTok, right? Because they know where the demographics are of that channel. They do it on Facebook, they do it on their website, and it's called Other Duties as Assigned. And what they're doing is they're having the city manager and city leaders out there doing the things the city does, the daily tasks that we all see every day, but we really don't pay attention to. We know that we go to the park, the lawn is mowed, but we don't really know much about it. We know about it when it's not mowed. But what we're doing is we're putting the city manager in the mowing truck, mowing, and then we're showing this. All those little things that the city does to give it some personality and give the people a connection between a personality and the work of the city. And what we see over the course of 2 to 3 years is that all of a sudden everybody knows who the city manager is, because they've seen it or they've had their friends talk about it. And what we're doing is we're leaning into the perception that they're not approachable people, and that it's the government, and I'm using my big air quotes here, as opposed to people that live in the community with us, that want a lot of the same things we do. They want nice parks. They want to be able to enjoy their city and a good quality of life. And now we see these people in the duties that they're doing. And so that's one approach we've used really, really successfully for a lot of cities. They just don't think about it in that term. You got to push out those leaders a little bit. That's kind of on the good news side. On the issues management side, we do the same technique for certain cities, because what happens is when you're not unsure of something, when you know there's aftershock, so you get bad news that the groundwater in your city could be contaminated, right? And you don't know anything really about groundwater, but you know your wells come out of the ground, right? And so what we've done, as opposed to having residents mad at, again, quote unquote, the city, using the big air quotes, we want to make sure our city leaders actually are the ones that are interfacing and their names are known. So I don't call the city. Again, I call a named person who is a friend and neighbor. And then we set kind of customer service protocols behind that, so that anybody who calls the city during the course of a day gets a return phone call during the course of the day. Anybody who sends an email to the city gets a response within a day. Anybody who contacts us through a web form gets a response within a day. And all our social media is monitored, so that Jim or Sally or whatever the person is answers it directly. And we set aside time in their day to be that kind of front face for the city. It's a different approach to cities where everything goes to voicemail and calls get routed. It's a very personal, hands-on approach. And so that's helping us manage the issue, because now I'm not afraid of the groundwater that may or may not be contaminated. I know I can go ask Bob about it. And it sets up a different type of channel and expectation among the residents. It suddenly isn't scary. The aftershocks gives me some certainty, because I'm not just calling a big amorphous being. I'm calling a person with a character and a responsiveness that makes me feel better. So I'm selling you certainty over uncertainty through a personalized channel. So that's kind of where you see this data that Tony points out so correctly, right? We see that every day. And I say, don't be afraid of something that looks like a negative. If what was the trust in local government people was 26% or something, Tony, if I remember the number right. To me, that's a growth edge that we should capitalize on. Okay, if it's there, I've got a huge opportunity to grow that. It's not a good thing to start with, but I can grow that. I know I can grow that. It gives me the impetus to say, hey, here's why you elected official, or you civic worker, got to push you out of your comfort zone. And again, that growth edge is a remarkable thing. And then you see it actually happen. It takes a couple of years for that to take hold, and you have to grow and nurture that kind of relationship over time. But I can tell you the cities that deal in issues management that are longer range with that approach always do better. You see the number of protests within a city hall coming down. You see the angry comments at city meetings go down. You see things happen different when you go to have neighborhood meetings because you know and have that interface. So that's just one really effective way to take Tony's data and put it into practical application for your city.
And I think I have another great example for those that feel like leadership maybe not have the bandwidth to be in the forefront all the time. We here at Redondo Beach, in Redondo Beach, while I was working with their organization, had a community engagement board. So maybe you can't do it, but you have a group of people that are trusted by the community, not necessarily by you,
Right.
that are an extension of leadership to have conversations and let people know what's going on and help them get to know leadership and how the department runs and all of those things. We wound up having it was a homicide out on one of our local areas, and to keep down the ruckus that usually would take place after something like that, there were community members that were armed with information that then the community was able to go to as a trusted source and say, hey, what's going on? They don't feel like they're just getting spin from the department. They're actually listening to people in their community that they trust. So there's various different ways to build community and build trust in your community, but you have to actually make the move to engage in a form where you are trying to build trust, because there are still organizations out there that don't care. They're just like, this is what we do, and either you like it or you don't. And they don't really feel it until something happens. It's almost like a crisis communication thing. Like, you don't need it until you need it. But if it's not there, you're definitely going to feel it, right? So if you don't care about the trust until you actually need it, it might be too late. And then there's a lot more work to be done. So my other question to you, Paul, for the most part, is what is your advice for organizations that have yet to really utilize their social media channels? Because we're looking right here at data that says social media is a big part of how we build trust with our organizations, but there are still organizations that definitely do not utilize it to its fullest capacity. So what is your advice to them?
So I got a couple of bits of advice that I use with my clients, and one of them is, and this sounds funny when you first say it, but follow the strategy here is to get small. And what I mean by that is that everything has to be hyper local to you and personalized to your city and the personality of your city. What that looks like in terms of the channels we use, I tell everybody, as much as I hate to see local media die, we need to foster local media thriving, in other words, because people still read the online versions of their local news, whether it goes through a Facebook feed or it's a media site that does kind of hyper local news. That's getting small. The smaller the news organization that has a level of trust, the more you need it. The same thing goes with social media. And that's why we have to make things that are approachable. And I always tell my clients that I work with, let's do a demographic study of your city. Let's look at it from kind of like you looked at the breakouts that Tony had there. You have male, female, you have race, you have gender, you have income level. You also look at, kids in the household. And then you also have to look at, what the language mix is. And what I mean by that is, in some communities, like in Minneapolis here, there's a large immigrant community from Somalia. The first group that came over, a lot of them didn't have English as a first language, but the kids did. So we knew there's a translation of language going up. So we had to communicate to two audiences, the parents who are not as fluent in English and the kids who might have been. And so we knew that there was a translation going on. We see that through successive generations of immigrant populations that come to a bigger city like Minneapolis, when they come in kind of a bigger group. Right. So it's about making sure that you're not only considering the direct one-to-one communication you're doing, it's also the two-to-one communication. You're sending it out. It's getting filtered through a younger person in the household and moving it up. So you have to make it hyper local to your city and what it looks like. And again, all these things are great opportunities for you to communicate better and more effectively by considering all this.
Jennifer McGinley says she loves this conversation. I hope so, because it's important that we penetrate through some of these brick walls that we have against some of the cliches that people feel about PR and comms and PIOs and things of that nature. But understanding how you build trust in your community is incredibly important. And one of those cliche words is brand. I use it often, but it's because I want people to get more comfortable with it than feel like it's some type of entertainment only term. And Paul, I've heard you say in the past you work with your municipal clients to more or less brand certain city staff, and you also work with municipal clients to establish customer service standards. How is this reflected in the polling and the work you do?
Well, so in the cases where we can actually poll, and in Minnesota, it's very common, for example, that most cities will do kind of a state of their city kind of poll every other year. That's a pretty standard thing that most cities do. So you can look at, what your residents think based on polling. If they don't do it every other year, they do it once every 5 years. So you can actually look at the data year over year, and you can do comparisons. The fun thing I like to do with, the twin cities here, Minneapolis and St. Paul, you have your two big core cities, and then you have first ring suburbs, second ring suburbs, you get your exurbs, and going all the way out. When you work with different cities and you ask them about the reputations of other cities, it's funny to see the responses. And then you ask them to think about theirs. And most of them are, this city is this, or this one's backwards, or this one's whatever it may be. And then when they think about what their brand is and why they've earned that brand, right? Your brand is kind of lives in the people who, live in the brand. So sometimes it's hyper local to who lives there because of the experiences they have. And you've got to change those experiences. And that means customer service matters, because what happens is when you see how information goes through a city, a lot of times I tell people the number one way it goes in a city below, I'm talking a smaller city below 75, like we looked at, it is person to person. It's the neighbor that has the bad experience that goes to the next neighbor, the next neighbor. It could be any type of neighbor in any type of kind of category. It could be the innovator, the early adopter, the late majority, or the laggard, right? Our job is to make sure all those types of mindsets and all those communication styles get hit in the right way. And so, Tonya, like you talked about having people out there that are part of the community, kind of bridging those gaps back and forth, you have to go build the bridges and figure out where to build those bridges. And a lot of times cities are kind of lazy because they think only the website will do it. And it's often more than that. We know that it is people, and it could be city staff, or it could be your Park and Rec Advisory Board, right? It could be those boards that you mentioned that you go out there to talk about the standards of the park, and they advise the elected officials and the city staff on how it should be run. But the more hyper local and personal you can make it, the better off you are. If you don't have a brand position for your city that you're purposely building, you're probably not succeeding as well as you could, which means that you should have the data points that you're working for and the proof points, right? Set the brand, set the proof points, and then go live up to those proof points. If you're not doing that, your brand is getting set by your lowest moment. And we should be setting our brand by our highest values. And that is often the problem that we see. So it has to be purposeful. It has to be thoughtful. It has to be well built out. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's got to be care and fed over time. And that it's a really fun thing to do with cities because they don't think it can be done. And then they see it done and they're like, wow, I really love to be the city that's known for its parks and its trails, its livability, right? Its connectedness, whatever those qualities are, as opposed to the place that has a big highway running through it. I've made the big highway connectedness, and that's kind of what you need to do.
I'm not going to beat a dead horse here, but I want to dive just a little bit into diversity, equity, and inclusion, because when it comes to data, you actually need to include everyone. So, Tony, can you get into why diversity is important when you are doing this work, and how eliminating the diversity of a city or a county or a state can skew your data?
But I think you both made excellent points in this regard, about the brand experience and about the brand. I don't know if you call them ambassadors, word you use, so people out in the community. We've done research around people are going to relate to people who have a similar lived experience, and they're going to look to people who have a similar lived experience for advice. And if you're not actively getting into that conversation with leaders in the Black community, non-Hispanic community, the Hispanic community, the Asian community, people with different gender identity communities, the brand experience that Paul referenced is going to be informed by the letter next to your name as a city official, whether it's an R or a D, and the national conversation that's going on in that regard. And so you're going to sacrifice a lot of contact with the people, and as the data shows, a lot of those people, young people, people of different non-white, Black, non-Hispanic, Hispanic, and Asian, are the most engaged with your website, with your social media, commenting on your social media. So leaving that out, dropping out of that conversation is sacrificing a great moment to build those numbers and build a better brand and build a more engaging brand, from the data perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that. Paul, tell me about holiday light shows in fire departments. Like, why is this becoming a thing? I mean, I have my own story, but I definitely want to hear from you why these types of events are becoming a thing.
Yeah, so for people who haven't seen this, a lot of cities, especially in the Midwest, do this in the wintertime because when it's cold and you can't go out, a lot of people do car light tours. So you drive by the house that have all the pretty lights on, whatever. Well, now what we have is our fire departments doing the same thing by synchronizing the lights on their trucks. So you drive by the fire department like you would the neighbors' houses, right? And you see a light show put on at night. We're doing that on purpose in a lot of our cities because what is that telling us? It's telling you that I can come to the fire department. It's not a scary thing. I should get to know these people, right? I should get to know what these people do for me and what I can do to keep myself safe in that city. And so what we start seeing now is that different cities, especially in the fire departments, and you saw the trust differential between fire departments and police, right? What we're trying to do is make sure we maintain the trust of the fire department and also see if we can encapsulate it further into public safety to go beyond just fire, but into police and other things that we do in terms of public safety. And so sometimes what we're doing is not only having the fire trucks in their bays doing the lights and the buildings lit up and putting them on the lights tour, then we have a police vehicle outside there too. And then you associate those things together when you can. Now, again, we can't always have, because some of these public safety vehicles have to be out on calls, right? We do the buildings and the vehicles. And it gives you this great kind of ability to come and say, hey, this is something I know about. I don't just call the fire department when I need something and it's a negative. It's something that brings me some joy. And again, you're building those connections between people to say, hey, I had a good experience with the fire department or our public safety of our city. And again, we're seeing this more and more grow because I think we're seeing cities having fun with this. It becomes part of their brand and their approachability, which is really important for today's world.
Love that. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this up here so you guys can take a good look at, I let the slides run so you can see some of the research, some of the ways, the information that Tony and Researchscape can bring to the work that you are doing. But if you are working with municipal organizations, city, state, county, federal organizations, and even in your consumer goods, the more information you have, the better you can strategize to have the impact that you are looking to have with your work. There's nothing worse than doing great work, but you're targeted at the wrong people, or you don't have the research and the data to help make sure that it penetrates where you are trying to get the results from. So I definitely want to thank Tony for doing the work. And before we get out of here, Tony, let them know how to get their own surveys done and be involved and work with you in Researchscape.
There's one comment that I always like to refer to. I was speaking to the CMO of a brand that you probably have, everybody on this call has in their house. And they said, you can never know enough about your customers. And I think that's part of this conversation is whether your customers are buying soda or life insurance or they're not buying anything, they're just part of your community, you need to know everything you can about that, especially going to your point, Tonya, about diversity. as they break out across different ethnicities, gender identities, demographics, other categories. But yeah, you can reach out to us, researchscape.com. I'm T. Cheevers at researchscape.com, and we're be happy to talk about how does trust play into the work that you do. How can we find out, are you a trusted brand? Do you need something different in your communications? Because I see in the news all the time, there's something going on and there's no public hearings being held, and you just sort of say, somebody call Paul, somebody call Tonya, because this is not the right approach.
Right.
I think the most important thing you said is trust. And whether you're trusting leaders in municipal organizations or you're trusting the person that's manufacturing your jeans, if you don't trust them, you're less likely to buy from them or support them or want to give them your money, right? Trust is underrated. I'll just put it out there like that. Before we get out of here, Paul, thoughts?
Well, I just want to thank Tonya and Tony for bringing me in this conversation, and for, we had a great conversation when we're building this survey that Tony executed. I agree with Tony's point. You can't know enough about your customers or your residents, however you want to look at it. And taking the time to look at this research with someone that's skilled like Tony, or someone that can give you practical advice on implementing this like Tonya and I think is worth it for anybody in the public sector, no matter the size of your organization. Having that set of eyes that looks at this through the vantage point of data-driven customer knowledge helps you build that trust that you need. And so don't be shy about, hitting up Tonya or I to help you talk about how we can make this better for the organization you work for.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Again, this is Tonya McKenzie. I'm happy to always talk about public relations, trust, telling stories to help people build better community. I think we are in a time right now where I will continue to say it, trust is underrated. How you build it is with authenticity and stories. I love how Paul leaned into, telling the stories of the people that are in these organizations so that the community can get to know, like, and trust them. That's literally what we do every day. And how we communicate that information out is a way that Tony helps. Who are they listening to? How are they getting their information? All of these things are key to being impactful in the communities in which we are speaking to and serving. So if there is anything that any of us can do for you, please do not hesitate to reach out. I'm Tonya McKenzie PR on all social media platforms. Paul, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, I have a funny last name, so if you just Google Omodt, Omodt, you'll find me on the website or LinkedIn or somewhere, because there's not a lot of us that have that goofy name. So just go ahead and find me any way that works for you.
I love it. And you get in touch with Tony at ResearchScape. He's always available to help with ideations and ideas on how you get the best information. So please don't be afraid to reach out, because we are always ready to lean in to these conversations to help build trust and help people get to know, like, and trust you. Thank you guys for being here. We hope this has been helpful, and please reach out.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.